Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 13 of the Inside Events podcast by Swapcard. This is lucky number 13, a show I'm super excited about. It is the kickoff for season 2, and we have two very special guests. But before I introduce them, I am your host, Megan Powers, and my company is Powers of Marketing, and we provide strategic communication, consulting, strategy for small to medium-sized businesses, sometimes to universities, and I will share that here in a second in relation to one of our guests. I do want to say, if you have any feedback for us or would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out to us via our Twitter account. It is @theeventprofs. Okay. I said this episode is going to be special, and our guests are special. All of our guests are special, but especially today. Today, we're talking events, of course, but also a little tourism and making an effort to amplify Black voices in tourism and meetings and events. And our guests are Alana Dillette and Tess Vismale. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to read,
Megan.
Of course. So I'm going to read their bios. I also like to throw in a little how I know the guests when I already know them. Alana is a professor at San Diego State and in the hospitality and tourism management program there, and it's such a mouthful. I was going to say the whole thing. That's the short version. And I worked there and did their social media and website updates for a year. And I am an alumna of San Diego State too. So I got to work with her a little bit while in that role. All right, I am going to read her lovely bio here. Dr. Alana Dillette is an assistant professor at the Payne School of Hospitality and Tourism Management at San Diego State University, where she teaches undergraduate and graduate courses with a specific focus on leadership development. Her research interests include exploring issues around diversity and inclusion in the hospitality and tourism industry. More specifically, she studies the intersection between tourism, race, gender, and ethnicity, and is a leader with Tourism Reset as an initiative coordinator. Currently, she is working on research to gain a better understanding of how systemic racism has shaped the hospitality and tourism industry for Black travelers and professionals. Dr. Dillette works to continue building bridges between industry and academia and can also be found online in publications such as The Conversation and the Trip Doctor podcast. And I will provide links to her work and to those shows in the show notes. Next up, Miss Tess. Tess Vismale is an award-winning chief event executioner and event technologist for Social Execution Incorporated, an event execution firm, tech whisperer for live events for Dahlia Plus Agency, event tech pull-up podcast co-host, virtual event superhero, and speaker. For years, she has educated the business events industry on event tech. Tess is the first Black person in the inaugural class in her industry to receive the Digital Event Strategist certification. She thrives virtually and face-to-face, managing event logistics and tech merged with events. She's a live virtual event associate with Exec Online. She was recognized as a member of Connect Association Magazine's 15 over 50. Don't look a day over 35. This honor highlights the top professionals in the events industry. She's a certified meeting professional, digital event strategist, and stage manager for TEDx Peachtree for the last 9 years. And I know Tess because, she's awesome, and I'm an event tech geek too. So we've worked just sort of in tandem, I think, at trade shows and stuff. And then I got the chance to work with her as a guest geek on Dahlia's team at one point. And we'd had Dahlia was on episode 10, I think. So
not too long ago.
Yeah, pretty recent. So the last 4 shows of season 1 all had to do, not surprisingly, with going online with your events. The word virtual is, thrown about. I have kind of a thing with the word virtual. I know we have to use it, but it is not virtual conversation we're having. We are having a real conversation. And I think it's going to be a really good one. So I'm going to start off by sharing just kind of my personal reason why I wanted to do this. So I, obviously, COVID's been really rough. And then the Black Lives Matter movement has really created this tidal wave of, thought and everyone kind of emerging, not everyone, but, the world kind of taking notice finally at injustices that have been done. And what it occurred to me is that while I am not racist, I need to do better and I need to be anti-racist. So I need to sort of have those conversations that are tough with people when I hear things that I don't want to hear, that are inaccurate, that are, putting down a part of our humanity that matters as much as anybody else. And that's the point. Black Lives Matter is not at the advancement of them over anyone else. It's that they have been stifled, and I'm excited about the direction we're headed. I've been doing a lot of listening and a lot of learning, but I also realized too that while I never have picked a guest at the exclusion of anyone, any race, gender, creed, whatever, that I need to do better, and we can do better, and we will do better. So this is a start. There's no end, and we're going to talk about this. There's no end line to this movement, to this time. There's just more work, and so this is a start. So with that said, I would like our both the guests to share their thoughts, their personal experience, and anything really that you want to share right now about kind of where you're at with all of this and your life experience and how it has sort of, how that intertwines with your work. Alana, you want to start us off?
Sure. First, thank you for providing this platform. I think what you said earlier about just listening and talking about these issues is so important. So thank you for having us here. So you gave my kind of official bio, but I guess a bit more background about me and I guess how it helps me to place myself in this work is originally I'm from the Bahamas. So that's where I was raised and lived all of my life before coming to the US, but I've lived in the US for 15 years now. And that's important in this specific scenario, I think, because the Bahamas is a predominantly Black country. So I moved from a place where I had Black leaders and teachers and people to look up to. And the first place I lived in the US was Alabama, which has its own stereotypes and historical inequities that are specific to that area of the US. And so in a way, I think it provided me with a privilege to really understand what it's like to live in a society where we don't suffer from some of the same issues as the US. But as I got educated and started to go out into the industry and then eventually became a professor as I am now, it really gave me a unique perspective of some of the issues of systemic racism that we face here in the US and have trickled down, even though the Bahamas is predominantly Black, trickled down into that society as well through colonialism and other ways, and understanding how it's affected the tourism industry, which is what I really do a lot of my research on and teach about in my classes. So I think for me, when I think about just personal experiences and how I've been feeling over the past month or so as Black Lives Matter has sort of resurged, right? Because it's been around for a long time.
Right.
It is just, I've been doing this work for a while, and at first it was disheartening because I think a lot of hospitality and tourism professionals that I run into, or even just people in general, we all think of our industry as fun, right? This is the fun industry. And it is, because a lot of what we do has to do with creating experiences for people who are seeking leisure and seeking happiness. But we can't look at that at the, I guess, at the expense of really understanding how systemic immobilities and inequalities for Black people specifically in this case have shaped our industry over history and continue to trickle down into what we do today. So all that to say that I'm really glad to be here talking about this. And I really do think that it's an important topic for our industry, as it is for many, many different industries, for us to come together, to listen, and to come up with some solutions to begin to and continue to make changes.
Wonderful. Miss Tess.
Yes. I'm happy to be here, Megan. I'm very excited about the position you took to reach out, to amplify, to take your space as a place to do something different and ask and listen. And I think over time, what has happened from my position of my career, because I've kind of worked in all aspects of the industry, almost, I should say, because I've worked in academia, nonprofit, profit, corporate, the like, on the venue management side, as well as the planning side, and then kind of in between the two now in helping, where tech and planning meets, in a sense. I've seen that we don't take enough time to redefine what it means to be a Black person going through and navigating those facets of the industry. And I think what's interesting with Alana is that she's coming from an academic perspective and social, and then I'm coming from a meeting and business events perspective. So you've done a great job in bringing us together. Our experiences, although seem different, the outcomes are very similar. Because when we start talking about D&I, we kind of lose sight of those other categories sometimes. And it reigns true that we don't do enough dialogue and coming together. So it's my hope, and I think the COVID, which is one of the pandemics, and the second pandemic, which has been happening for almost over a century now, or even more, has brought us to the point where we can stop, and I call it respect the pause, and think about what we're doing differently, how we can come together and dismantle assumptions, and hopefully through the events that we produce, right? Because the mere fact that we're able to use technology to do these events reaches those different populations, right? Reaches all the various different opinions and thoughts and point of views, and bring it to a point where we can move forward. So that's kind of how, from a career standpoint, I'm trying to utilize my skill sets to help amplify, and hopefully those can see it as well.
Lovely. Thank you both for sharing. And so to take it a step further, I mentioned there's no end date to this movement. And so I want to hear from your perspectives why, because while I think to some it might sound obvious, to others, not so much. So, I want to be educated. I want our listeners to be educated. So Alana, what do you think in terms of where we are, with there being no end date? Really, it's kind of just beginning in a way, right? It's not, but it is.
Yeah. It's a hard question to have a sort of a one-liner tangible answer to. But the way that I try to think about it is, I know there's a big sort of debate. Some people feel it's political about, Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. And my response to that is always, all lives won't matter until Black Lives Matter. And that's what this movement is really about on a wide scale. And I think when we really consider why we are even having to say Black Lives Matter, there are, it's hundreds of years of systemic issues that have been steeped into the makings of this country, literally the physical makings of this country in many ways. So they're extraordinarily deep-rooted, and because they're so deep-rooted, they're sometimes very difficult to see. And I think that's why it's taken us so long to get to this moment where we see an awakening amongst many, many different people, white people in particular, who are now like, wow, I finally get it. And so if it's taken us this long to get to this point, I think that kind of speaks to why there really is no end date. And the movement speaks to Black lives, but also it speaks to equality and justice for all. And that's not what this podcast is about today, but layered within this is going to be work and reconciliation, racial reconciliation, that has to happen. And I just don't see an end in sight in our lifetimes. I hope that one day, you know, in the future, we can live in a world where these aren't the issues that we're tackling. But I don't know if that really answered the question, but it's just deep.
Yeah, no, it totally is. And I respect that it's hard to answer. And these are hard conversations that we're having. And but I think that you did a good job of rounding of that out. Ms. Tess, what do you think?
I totally agree. I think that it's almost like people are like, well, why did this happen back to back? Because we needed, as a society or as a whole, something to strike a match and stop us in our tracks. Because obviously, as human beings in this life, we weren't living as we should, period. And something like COVID, it to me is similar to when you catch a cold, like when you're running as event professionals, we're constantly, right? We're close to the number one profession as it deals with stress, right? And then if you don't shut down and stop what you're doing and take care of yourself, your body will shut down for you, right? It just signal to shut down for you. So that, to me, that's how I look at when COVID stepped in to humanity, right? Where it said, okay, enough is enough. You weren't paying attention to me. All right, boom, here it is. Shut it down. And then now we're going to pick back and give you, now that we've leveled the playing field, now we're going to give you an opportunity to clean out, recognize all the gunk will come up, right, and out when you're sick and you're not feeling well. And then it's the rebuilding process, right? We do have the ability to be able to reconfigure our DNAs, but you know, how do we do that if we can't recognize it from the beginning that there was an issue and a problem? And I think we have to do more, especially on the business event side. You know, on her side of the business, they choose to go where they want to be, right? Whereas our side of the businesses and the act of business chooses the people we deal with, how we come together. And that's why it's very important, I think, as event professionals, for us to take a step in a direction of realizing that we control those narratives. All the choices that we make as business event strategists, which is who we should be, is how the planet engages, period. Every time people come together to meet to have a conversation, someone organizes that. So that precipice lives on us to design those experiences where they are extremely equitable and they're inclusive and thoughtful in every step of the process.
Wow.
I love that, Tess.
Oh,
yes.
Thank you.
Deep.
It's
thoughts.
true though.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been working on a project actually sparked by COVID where I interviewed a bunch of different event professionals about how they've been innovating in response to COVID. And these interviews all took place before the violent killings that we've witnessed, which is what we're talking about now. But one of the things that came out was just how much this pandemic has, if we didn't realize it before, has reminded us of the importance of community and getting together, and that in-person events and meetings are not going anywhere. We're actually craving them more than ever. And I think at the same time, like you mentioned, Tess, that's also part of the solution to what we're talking about now is creating these spaces for us to really talk and listen and create this equitable environment. And that's just so, so powerful. And I had never thought about it before in that way, but you put it so beautifully.
Thank you. And I said, when we were in the pre-show, I said to Megan, I said, Megan, it's important that we take a step and realize what it took to get to this show that you just put together. This show should be a case study, litmus test, whatever you want to call it, as a baseline of you taking a step where you chose to go to someone and amplify their message of a person who was Black, right? About how you felt about them because you utilized your audience to do so. Then you move to another step of saying, well, then how can I give voice, right? And then how can I bring this story together and give an opportunity for you to be transparent on how you came through the process, right? So we're all vulnerable. We all may not know what to do and say, but we all came together and said, you know what, I'm not sure. Well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Those are the candid conversations that we have to have, right? To move forward. But if we always stay in I'm in my own point of view, own way, we'll never get to the core of the matter so we can move past that to do the magic.
Right.
Right. So that's why I think this is important. And I thank Swapcard for even being brave enough to allow this to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of at the heart of what this is all about for me. And I think for many white people who have been like afraid to have conversations, who are tiptoeing because we don't want to say the wrong thing. And, we had this conversation in the pre-show also about there was a time when you weren't allowed to say Black. You had to say African-American, or people made you feel bad, or person of color, and all these kinds of things. So I think all these conversations are also helping us to be more comfortable with just having conversations, just speaking up and asking, and recognizing, there are so few Black people in the C-suite and on stages, and it's something that I have been noticing, but I recently, actually, before this all emerged, was having this conversation with some people in this one conference that I attend, at how whitewash it is, so I think now hopefully things will change. I mean, everything takes time, but I think this is definitely a start, and this is literally the least I could do. I'm trying to help, but there's a lot to be done, and but you got to start somewhere. So
yes, you do.
All right, Alana. So your focus, as you said, has been primarily on general tourism. Has anything through the COVID situation and the Black Lives Matter reemergence of the past several weeks, has it made you consider other research projects that you think you want to do?
Definitely. It has. As I mentioned just earlier, I actually just recently finished a project on the impact of COVID and events, and how event professionals like you all are using this time to innovate through the pandemic and also afterwards. And I haven't completed any projects yet, but I'm definitely seeing more opportunities opening up, because more organizations now, we've seen, I can't count anymore how many solidarity statements I've seen from hospitality organizations, whether it be hotels, event companies, professional associations. And I've been really encouraged by those statements. But from the research perspective, something that I'm really interested in looking at is what is going to be the trickle-down effect of those statements over time. And just the statements themselves, are they vague, or do they point to very specific things that organizations are going to try to do? And then how are they following up with that? And so we can actually see in a year, 5, 10, 20 years to come, what has changed from this time standpoint in time. And I think one of the ways that research can help is to collect data, collect the numbers on things like you said, who are the people in C-suite positions, if we can collect data on income levels, on who are the people speaking, just various different sort of check boxes so that we have a framework to say, okay, this is where we were and this is where we've moved to. And so I'm really hoping to partner with some organizations that have put out solidarity statements and want to do this kind of work. And then beyond that, I mean, first and foremost, I'm an educator, right? So I really take my role seriously in making sure that in my classrooms and with my students, I find ways to educate them about these issues and how they can deal with them, because they're going to be the leaders of the future. And so I do really think that above and beyond a lot of even what we're doing in the profession, it's really important that we make sure that we're educating our future leaders to be inclusive and equitable, and really care about the stories, right? Because I think data in numbers is important, but I also really think it's important for us to know the stories. So as an organization, I mean, simple things you can do to start. Maybe you can't fire everybody in your C-suite and rehire, but you can ask the Black employees that you do have, what is their experience like? And find ways to sort of change from within, I think is really important. So that I sort of babbled on, but
no, awesome, all amazing. Yeah, and I forget because I did my master's thesis and on in the event space. That's where my head always goes to. But you're a teacher, you're teaching, so obviously that's part of it, and super important, clearly. Especially right now in this moment, while they're students, while this is going on, to help them then move out and into the industry and be better and be, I love it.
It Tess, is. It's so important. Sorry, I was just going to add.
Please.
Similar to kind of what you were saying earlier about, the speakers that we host at these conferences, in many schools, especially hospitality and tourism, we host a lot of guest speakers in our classes. So one of the things I was already doing, but we'll definitely focus on even more, is like making sure they see a diverse range of faces and stories. So it's not always just saying, all right, here's the chapter on how systemic racism impacts, being a hotel manager or being an event manager, but really just making sure they have representation of different stories. I think that's important too, and that's part of the work that we can do as educators and as event professionals.
And you would tell us about the club that you're the advisor for?
So I'm also the advisor for an organization called National Society of Minorities in Hospitality. And it was started 31 years ago, I think, now. And it's a national organization. They have chapters all around the US. And their main goal is to support and increase representation of minorities in hospitality. So there's already a framework out there, and we've already been doing a lot of the work with them. So I think this just gives us a springboard, one, to say that this work still needs to be done even 31 years after its founding, but also a springboard to continue to talk about these issues, because I think before this, a lot of people felt like it was behind us, and this was just a really, really intense wake-up call that it's not.
For sure. Yeah. And I wonder, the large association, the meeting and event associations, the MPIs, the PCMAs, the ILEAs should be partnering with that club, with local chapters, and working with them. How interesting it would be to be like, have the students be the teachers to teach these associations for how to be better.
Yeah, I would love that. So if anybody's listening out there, I know that we have a lot of partnerships with the bigger hotel companies that have established, a lot of them have established D&I programs and whatnot. I know the struggle for educators with regards to connecting to event professionals has been the event profession is a bit more fragmented than the hotel industry. So but we have a lot of students who want to get into events. So we would definitely love to see that. And I think this organization would be a great start if anyone is interested.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Tess, how do you think that non-Black event professionals can help to amplify Black voices in the meetings and events industry?
That's such a loaded question.
I know it is. I have faith in you. I have faith in you.
One sentence or less.
I know, right? So I want to answer that, but I want to also add to the conversation that
yes, please.
you all were just having,
Yeah.
which is that there is also the National Coalition of Black Meeting Professionals.
Right.
So on our side, from a business event side, and I know we talked about it pre-show, so on the precipice of coming from our side of the business, I am taking an active role in bringing the entities together to talk about how all of the organizations like Destination International, like MPI, like Connect, who have already made statements and have already made long-term commitments to the coalition, as we call it, the coalition, right?
Right.
And are putting action to the statements that they have already and beginning to collect data from the coalition's perspective and bringing in her piece and hopefully having her at the table as well with the initiatives that are happening, because they have an entire, student internship program. It's like it's mirroring, right? So how can we bring social and business events together for the higher purpose? Because you have, we're servicing different,
Yeah.
servicing the industry as a whole, but just a little different, because you got convention, you have CVBs are part of it. In addition to planners, you've got Black business professionals who are sitting in roles within the hotels who are members as a member organization. So Jason Dunn, the chairman of the board, and Marlinda have been doing a wonderful job in leading the organization into another sector and have 3 to 5 year commitments from those institutions that we've been talking about.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, and let's let this simmer for a little while, and then I want to have them on and see how it's going.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But to answer your
I know it's a loaded question. Just answer the best you can. Obviously, these are all hard.
Well,
we're not solving all the problems of the world today. We're clear.
But I think it's really truly what I mentioned earlier is utilizing the experiences that we had in building this show and what they're doing. You took a step. You did you looked inward. You saw. You said, wait. What do I need to do different? What are my resources that I have to do what I can within my space? Then you ask the questions. Then you took action together and not made assumptions and came honestly. And I think the biggest thing that white people can do is to come sincerely in any aspect of any person that they know. Because it will immediately come across as an opportunist position if they're not coming from their heart space. And then especially right now, with what I've seen with myself and others, Black professionals, especially event professionals, are under a lot of pressure. You've got COVID pressure, people who've lost completely, our whole industry collapsing, who's lost everything. And then you have this added on where people are asking you 1,000 questions and pulling and tugging. And what do I do? How do I do everything? I'm sorry, everything.
Right.
Think about how you would want to be treated and to be and help, right? And you want to do it from the internal perspective. If you start from in to out first, you shouldn't have any problems because people will be able to see you, and if they see you for who you are, and then the work can begin. So that, those would be my things, and that should run the gamut no matter what it is, from the top to the bottom, top, middle, across. It should be those steps.
Taking the initiative to express the need from our perspective that your voices are amplified.
Correct. Within your own resources.
Whichever, and the
however powers that.
Right.
Whatever you think that you can affect, or if you have resources to help affect something else and connecting people, but you have to do it first. Because if you don't acknowledge and you're coming from a perspective of, like I said, or it comes across as you being an opportunist,
Right.
then that's where the pause, that's going to be like, no.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. I've heard some excuses, reasons, whatever, for why there are fewer diverse people on stages. This is not the people I know. It's like, well, that's my excuse in terms of me not looking outside my sphere, but I'm not running an event. I'm not like, I don't, so if I could take a look and say, well, how can I do better? I think every single conference organizer can do some research, can reach out to who they know. Like, I mean, it's just, it kind of boggles my mind how simple it really is to like just seek out people with varying backgrounds and opinions and races and ethnicities and everything, because it should be like, like Alana said, it should be equal all across the board. So, but for now, we're amplifying Black voices because that is that is what's happening right now, and that's what we need. What we
and
need
Megan,
to do.
And Megan, I don't want to stop you, but just what you said, the next step of what you just did would just be challenging them and just saying, hey, if you don't know, it's okay. Well, let me show you how. And then if they don't take it at that point, after they've been shown, then that's where the problem is. It's not the problem that you say you don't know. It's that when you say you don't know and then you've been shown how,
right,
and you don't.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like, at least what I'm understanding from this conversation that's really important is that allyship is going to be a necessary part of this process. Like Tess has been saying, the same way that you reach out to us, using that as kind of like a framework for how do you do this. And I think one of the things that this virtual life has given us is that people are much more open now to responding and coming on as a speaker or a guest with somebody that they don't know, because we're all using virtual. So there isn't the added barrier of, oh, well, do we live in the same city? And do I know you? And do I have the money to fly you here, XYZ? So I think we actually need to use that to our advantage to broaden our network so that when we are back in person, we can call on a more diverse range of people. And I hope that that's part of what comes out of this. And I already see it happening, right? I didn't know Tess before 10 days ago. And now because of you, I have this connection across the country that may turn into something larger. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Casting a wider net is something that's happening with that, because of all this just in general, right? I'm hearing of like thousands and thousands more people attending conferences than I've ever attended in person. And part of that is because we're stuck home, but I think part of it also is accessibility. Maybe these folks would have loved to go for the last 10 years, but they're, they're in a wheelchair and they can't, they just can't do it, or whatever it is. They don't have the finances,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, that's a great point. I like that. All right. It's a whole new world. I won't sing it. But,
we can hear it.
All right. So let's talk about some ideas. We've kind of already touched on this a little bit, but just kind of dig a little bit deeper. Conversation about how planners and suppliers can continue to keep the conversation going and help to make, and the word I use in the question is, profound changes in events, in travel and tourism, because profound is what I would like to see. I know it could take some time to get there. It's baby steps, potentially. But Alana, have you thought about this? Like, do you have any ideas?
Yeah. So I have been thinking about it, and I don't know how easily, this can be put into practice, but an idea that I have is, again, I'm coming from that educator's background. So, a lot of associations have annual conferences. that are somewhat educational based. And I think that it's important that we realize, like we were talking about before, this is not a movement with an end date. And so having something that is that is always on the roster, a workshop, a panel, and making it part of a main session where we talk about how far have we come in the past year with regards to, we can call it diversity and inclusion if we want to, but we really need to focus on the real issues. And we can start with race, and we can start with Black lives in whatever industry that association services. And I can tell you, year after year, I can promise that there will always be topics to talk about. And so I think having that and committing to that for a long-term period of time will make a difference. Other things, I mean, again, this is more from the research standpoint, I kind of already said before, but we need to put it out there. I mean, what are the numbers of our organizations? I realize, the argument is always, well, we can't have 50-50 because 50% of the population is not Black in the US. And I understand that, and I don't think that's what anybody's even asking for, but, seeing what are the cultures embedded in our organization that are stopping people from moving from management positions to directors to C-suite? How are we seeing a trickle-down effect? Because we already know that for women, that's an issue, right? We have a lot of women at a certain level, and then when you get up to a higher level, we see them dissipate. And I'm positive that you would see the same thing with regards to race and with regards to Black employees. So actually having numbers to back that up, I think, is really important so that we can face the issue head on and be systematic about how we address it.
Yeah, and making an effort to help promote within versus just, effort. It's all about effort.
It is. It's and I know you hadn't told me I can go yet. But
yeah, no, please.
I was going to add to what we were saying. Actually, I was going to say a little earlier is just like the Me Too movement flew off the shelf in a sense, right? And everyone's head turned towards women, protecting women. Right? And then look in our industry, right? So then even with our industry on the business event side, Megan, how that went rampant, right? And they were talking about just, you talking about sex trafficking, right? Huge campaigns, huge money, dollars, efforts to try to change that within the hotel industry, right? So along the same lines, you have to think about the shift has to happen. And I hate that shift and pivot word, but it's got to change. Something has to move. And now we've moved. It's the now. How can we do something a little different within our space? And, I'm not going to say the name of the organization because I didn't ask, right? But I'll give you this as a perfect example. I was interviewed by an organization not long ago, and right before, I also was a part of a conversation. It's an industry professional organization about these same topics. And it was kind of like what they were going to do. They were trying to ask the membership. And I made it a point in that conversation to say, hey, it's not about all D&I. It's not about all people of color. It's about Black people. That's the issue first. That's what I said. I left it there. I didn't move too much further. Then the recap around that conversation came out in public. And that recap was written with the B lowercase when they said Black people. So I'm sitting here reading this, took offense for obvious reasons. And I took it upon myself, and this is before I read the article that was about to be written about something I was doing, right? So I took the time to reach out to the editor and say, hey, in so many words, I noticed you did this, and this is a grave error, and this is why. And I cited articles for her, current articles for her to read, so she could go and take a look at what was happening. And her response back, it was, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for bringing this to my attention. Our departments had been talking about this. And we subscribe to the New York Times and Associated Press style guides. So in my mind, I'm saying what I said earlier, which is I'm bringing this to your attention because I'm going to assume you didn't know. And then I'm going to choose to educate. But then at that point, she says what she says, which means you had been talking about it and then you decided to go with. Well, there's a journalistic outlet, I'm going to call it, called The Brookings, and they had done an article in reference to the movement around getting the New York Times and Associated Press to change to a capital B versus a lower B for Black people. So in my response, I said, hey, in so many words, take a look at what your fellow journalists are doing. So I came out of our industry and talked about journalism in general. As a result, she came back and said, I'm gonna bring it to the team. She brought it back to the team within 9 minutes. She emailed me back and said, Tess, we not only are going to correct this article, we're gonna go back in all our marketing materials from the past, all our blogs, our publications from the past and change it. And moving forward, we basically will not see Black lowercase any longer. It will be capitalized from this point on. I didn't tell anyone. I've never told, I didn't publicly say any of that, and I won't reveal the organization, but it's that type of thing that we have to call, and we have to do little things to push the needle forward that I can even do, right, to help and assist. Right.
Well, and I didn't know, it just hadn't occurred to me until we talked about it. So I went back and I changed my Twitter handle and, updated it because I wanted, you're right. It's important to point out, because most of the time it's not going to be from a place of malice. It's going to be just from a place of ignorance, which I think is at the heart of all of this, right? Like my ignorance of, and I shared with you guys before, I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, but I had several Black people and people of color in my classes, and they were just my friends. Like I never thought about like how they lived their life, and they never shared anything that, was different for them than for me. And so really it was way later in life that I realized how out of tune and uninformed I was about how it is to live as a Black person, and not that I understand now, because I will never understand how it has been to be you. But I can, try to amplify and do better. So those are all things that are it. I mean, this could be listened to by anybody in any industry, right? Like this happens to be the space that we're in, but this is all applicable no matter where you sit. So I think that's like a perfect, unless anyone else has anything more you want to say, I think that's like the perfect way to round out the show.
The only other thing I would just say is that hopefully we can do more of these things, when we ask the questions, we're as speakers or educators, right, as podcast hosts, ask those questions that may be difficult, looking within our institutions, organizations, and hopefully we realize that it's us individually who make a change, just like our vote counts, right? It's us individually who, through our actions, vote towards making Black lives, as well as our entire community, better and greater. And then, therefore, the ripple effect is life will be better.
Right. For sure. Well, and speaking up in advance of things, like once you look at a speaker lineup for an event, that it's too late. That train has left that station for the most part. I mean, they might be able to add, but if we all let organizations know now as members, we vote with our dollars, right? I mean, who we belong to. There are plenty of meeting and event organizations that we can all belong to. you know, if we as members let them know this is important to us in advance of you know, events being organized, then hopefully that will also help to make change.
Yeah, it's the small things I think that really matter.
For sure.
And just to echo what both of you have said, one of the things I like to live by is the saying, start where you are. And I think that that's so important with all of this, is that I think all of us, it's a lot of emotion right now. Yeah. So we feel like, wow, this problem is so big, where do I start? And I think, Megan, you've done a great job with this podcast, and yes, whatever you're already doing, you know, try to make a change there versus trying to start a whole new thing, right? I think that's a really important takeaway for anybody from any industry. And your example about upcoming events with speakers and who you decide to support is a really good one, and an easy way to make your voice be heard.
Yeah. Well, thank you, ladies, both so much, and I'm so glad that there's like connection between the two of you too. That's amazing. Yeah. I can't thank you enough for being my guests on the first episode of season 2 of Inside Events, and this is just a start of a much bigger conversation, and you know, there's a lot more work to be done. But I think this is, anyone who listens to this is really going to get some great insights for the meetings and events industry at large, and then also for life, and that, just like you say, start where you are and see how you can make a difference, and every little bit counts.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, ladies. All right, y'all. This has been episode 13 of Inside Events by Swapcard, and we will catch you next time.